Objectivity, a topic we all are fond of. One-on-one conversations, something that we have every day. Objectivity in one-to-one conversations is critical to all of our long-term goals, to having wonderful romantic relationships, to having incredibly productive cooperative relationships with people at work, to be able to convince people about objectivism. It's a critical skill to have. Now, some of you may be wondering, how is this different from Leonard Peikoff's objective communication class? How many have listened to that or read the book? Okay, everyone who hasn't done that, go buy the book, go to the ARI website, it's available for free. You have to hear what Leonard Peikoff says about objectivity in communication. This class would not exist without that, for sure. But he is really covering a different topic. He is really covering the one-to-many case. I here am talking to you as an audience, and I need to judge what you as an audience can take in, and I need to do a lot of that preparation in advance. In a one-to-one conversation, it's on the fly. And that poses some additional challenges. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, some of you may be concerned that, well, I don't have control over what the other person does. So my promise is, I'm going to show you that your unilateral action can make a one-to-one conversation more productive and more friendly, even if the other person is emotional, illogical, insensitive, or in any other way does something you don't think that they should do. Now, the necessary context to even have a conversation, I think we should establish first. First of all, you should not be in a conversation unless there is a rational value of yours that you think could be gained by talking. Might be gained by talking. You have no control over whether you're actually going to gain it. But you need to be wanting one and thinking this conversation can help you get it. Now, there's also a second issue, which is really the sanction issue. It can't be the case that you know something negative about the other person that means you could not get that value now. So if this person is essentially dishonest, why are you talking with them? Or if this person is in an emotional tizzy, why are you trying to discuss philosophy with them? Right? You need to actually believe that you could get the value you are after, your selfish value, in this conversation. And that's what it really comes down to. It needs to be selfish to you to help facilitate making this conversation work. If it's not, why are you in the conversation? It should be selfish. You should have a conscious, selfish reason. And it's here and now. It needs to be something that you're willing to work toward here and now, because conversations happen in the here and now. Now, of course, the main concept that you need to understand for this is the concept of objectivity. And I put on your handout, which I have to tell you is more of a reference sheet than it is an outline. I put Leonard Peikoff's definition of objective from OPAR. To be objective in one's conceptual activities is volitionally to adhere to reality by following certain rules of method. A method based on facts and appropriate to man's form of cognition. Or the shorthand version, which is the subhead title, objectivity as volitional adherence to reality by the method of logic. The key thing here is the combination of devotion to the facts and recognizing the needs of the mind. And the number one fact in a one-to-one conversation is that there are two minds. Two minds. Yours has a context of knowledge, and theirs has a context of knowledge, and they are different. You have a value hierarchy, and they have a value hierarchy, and they are different. You have some priorities and goals right now, and they have some priorities and goals right now, and they might be different. That needs to be taken into account. Now, in a certain sense, I mean, most conversations go completely fine, right? It's not usually a problem to have an objective meeting of the minds or emotional connection. It's not usually a problem. But sometimes there is a problem, and I thought I would discuss three cases where I'm getting this like bump thing that's happening. Okay. 3 cases. Can you stop that? Do we need to do something here? Is it driving you guys crazy, or should I just ignore it? All right, I'm going to keep going, and if the guys in charge want to fix it, they will. Okay, I'm going to look at 3 kinds of cases, and look at what makes it easy or hard. And the first case is what I would call assigned roles, or I think I used a different word in the handout. And this would be something like you have a teacher and a student, or you have a leader and a follower, where there's an assumption there. It's usually pretty easy because the assumption is you wouldn't have a teacher and a student together unless the teacher wanted to explain something, the student wanted to understand it, which is, our case here. Presumably, you want to hear what I have to say. If not, I don't know why you're here. And the same thing with leader-follower. Presumably, the follower actually wants to get some guidance from the leader, and the leader has some knowledge about that. And so it's relatively easy because they have a shared purpose, or compatible purpose, really, is what it is. It's hard if that purpose is not explicit. It's hard if, the boss comes by and says, "Why are you working on that?" And the person who's doing it thinks, "Oh my God, he's criticizing me," where really what it is he wants to get an update. So making it explicit makes all the difference. Now, that's also usually easy because since one of the two in assigned roles tends to be the more expert one, the experts get training in making sure the purpose is clear, in making sure that they explain, in making sure that if the follower gets nervous, they say, "Oh, don't worry, I'm not criticizing you. I just need to know what you're working on right now because I'm thinking about X, Y, Z. Sorry, I didn't say that." And so usually it's pretty easy. Now, of course, if the expert is not skilled enough, it can fall apart, but those tend to be the easier cases, particularly if the person who, I'm using expert as a generic term just to get the concept across, but presumably that's not the hard case. Another case that is sometimes easy and sometimes hard is when there is no clear, or rather no relevant relationship. So this would be something like coworkers discussing politics. They have a relationship, but there's nothing that would say that they'd have the same political convictions. Or friends discussing art. They have a lot of values in common, but people can have very different sense of life, and their reactions to art can be very different. And you can have great conversations that are easy if both parties are, curious about the other person. They want to discover what the other person's strengths and weaknesses are, what their opinions are. They're looking for points of alignment. So, for example, I had a really productive conversation with a friend of a friend who is not an objectivist, I mean really not an objectivist, about all the rules to try to cut down carbon emissions. And I was really trying to understand where he was coming from, because he's a smart guy, he's a lawyer, and he was really kind of intrigued by objectivism. And so in our conversation where we really were trying to understand the other person, we didn't reach, neither of us convinced the other. But I think he got clearer that objectivism is consistent with not walking over all the people around you and, ridiculous, wrong view of selfishness that people have. And I got clear on where an intelligent person can come. It really comes from skepticism. He doesn't think you can know whether there's going to be global warming, but he thinks that it's safer to assume that it might be true and therefore plan for the worst. So it's a combination of skepticism and motivation by fear. That was very clarifying to me. And I mean, it's not like I knew how to then persuade him, but I really felt like I learned something and we had a good conversation. Now, this is killed makes it hard if one side jumps to conclusions about the other. Just kills it. So if I had said, you're not rational, or he said, you're not trying to understand me, in either case, it would have immediately become acrimonious, and it would have been more difficult to get any value out of the conversation. So there's it can be easy or it can be hard, and it depends on what's going on with the two people. And then here's a third case. I actually think this can be the hardest case. I'm calling it close allies with a history of agreement. See, it seems like this should be easy, because don't you agree on everything? Well, if you literally agree on everything, something is wrong. That only happens in a codependent relationship, where one person is basically, subjecting themselves, not speaking up, and just agreeing with the other person. It is just not possible for two independent people to agree on everything. I know, I'm married to Harry Binswanger. And so the thing that's hard is when you are expecting to be in agreement and suddenly that expectation is violated. It's like, what? I mean, you must have had this in conversations with other people who say they're objectivists, and they say something, it's like, you don't understand objectivism, what's wrong with you? I mean, where did that come from? Right? It's really easy to get triggered in that situation because your expectations have been violated. You thought you were talking with someone who was in alignment, and you were maybe letting down your hair, and then suddenly they're like saying, no, that's not right, and feel like you're being attacked. It can be really an issue, and I do think it's actually one of the things that can cause rifts between people. Or for example, a fellow objectivist criticizes a line that Ayn Rand wrote. It's like, what? You don't agree with Ayn Rand? So it can be challenging. But the good news is it's still easy if both people are curious about the other person and want to discover what's the strong point of their, where is this coming from? What's the good part of this? What's the weak part of what they are saying? What are the points of alignments? And I have to say, I hope he may be mad at me, but my example of this is Harry Binswanger and Peter Schwartz, who meet for breakfast once a week and argue the whole time, and they are so happy. They love doing that. This is like a big value to them, that they get to argue once a week at breakfast. And they learn a lot from each other as a result. So how do you always get into that state? What's really the solution to be able to maintain that kind of objectivity? And that really is, to me, that's like the paradigm case of objectivity in one-to-one conversations. It's Harry and Peter talking. And it comes down to two things that are both under your control. Objectivity in your intent and objectivity in your execution. And that's what we're going to spend the bulk of the time talking about. So objectivity in its intent. So this means your goal as you come into the conversation. Not all goals for the conversation are created equal. Some of them are rational and some of them are not rational. So here are three that are always objective, can always be rational. One is connection. Now, what is connection? I'm going to talk a little bit more about it, but basically it's when you have that sense of rapport with the other person, when you're in some kind of alignment and both focused on the same values. And A goal you can have for a conversation is to understand the other person's values and see how they connect with yours. And that will make you have actually an emotional feeling of closeness to them. And you're wanting to appreciate their values in relation to yours. That's something you can always do. That is a perfectly rational goal where you want to just, in effect, get a little closer to the other person. Second one, cooperation. This is maybe the most obvious, where you want to work with the other person towards some goal. And if your goal is to facilitate making that happen, you have some mutual goal and you're trying to facilitate making that happen, that is always rational, always objective. That's a terrific intention to have. And then the third major category is communication. And this is the case where you want to understand something, you want to have, in effect, a transfer of knowledge, right? There's something that is in one person's head, and you want to get it into the other person's head, and the version of that is always objective is they know something that you would like to know, and so, you're willing to, talk with them about that. You're actually drawing them out, and they're willing in that regard. So these three, connection, cooperation, and communication, these are the big three fundamental social values. And, there's a table on the back of your handout that it's my table of deep rational values, and you'll see that three of the categories have these as the heading. Those are all social values, things that can only be gained with another person. And I think it's very helpful to have those three categories. And this can be kind of generally your intent, but mistakes can really happen even if you think this is your intent. So I want to go into these in order from the simplest to the most complex about how you can actually think you have a perfectly rational goal for the conversation, and in fact you're being kind of subjective. And the simplest case would be for cooperation. And this is just, cooperation is joint action to a shared goal. So, for example, you're working on a project together. You both want to get, say, you want to figure out where you're going to go for dinner with your, someone in your family. You want to get a new web page up, and you've got two people who are contributing to it, and you're needing to agree what's going to go on and get the stuff done. Whatever it is, it's some project you're trying to work together. And, this is, cooperation is the goal of many, many, many conversations. It's involved in, this is a cooperative conversation here, right? I prepared, you paid money, I'm going to get money, right? This is a trade of value for value. And both of us needed to put some work. We needed to have this integrated goal. And, okay. Of course, that's not a one-to-one conversation. Sometimes you shouldn't ad-lib because it's confusing. Okay. But one-to-one teaching, you could imagine the same thing if I were talking with one of you about this. And then, of course, things like deciding what vacation you're going to take. There are all kinds of conversations you have that are, in effect, examples where the goal is cooperation. And you have a shared goal. Now, the mistake sometimes people make is they confuse cooperation with trying to control the other person. A necessary prerequisite for it to be cooperation is that you actually have a shared goal. If you think, well, it would be good for them to do such and such, so let me explain that to them because this is good for them and we should do this together. Or we should do such and such, so you need to start talking to me and do this. That is trying to control the other person. Both these cooperation concerns action, and when you're trying to get somebody to take action, it must be in their selfish interest. And you need to know that it's in their selfish interest when you start talking to them about it. Otherwise, you are not being objective. And I think that mistake gets made very often. And so, cooperation the thing to hold in mind is cooperation. If you think this involves the two of you working together, that cannot be determined unilaterally. There must be a mutually agreed upon goal, and ideally, an explicit mutually agreed upon goal. Needs to be mutually selfish. I think that's a fairly straightforward case, even though I do think we make mistakes about it. A little bit more complex case is the case of communication, ironically. Now, what is communication? It's one person gains a first-hand grasp of a fact, right? First-hand, right? Very important. With the assistance of someone who already grasps that fact. So communication is not like demagoguery or manipulation. You're not trying to use words to get somebody to do something. You're trying to use words in order to help somebody understand something that you already understand. And of course, here teaching is the classic case. But as I said, teaching is a cooperative undertaking. You can't initiate teaching. You can't decide that person doesn't understand this. I'm going to explain it to them. When my brother was, well, I was 6, so he was 4. I had just learned my ABCs, and I decided he needed to learn his ABCs. And we still tell stories about it. Poor Richard. He really suffered. It took me a while to learn how to be objective about him, but I did learn. Okay. The only time that you can have a completely unilateral goal for communication is when, first of all, somebody is already talking to you, right? You can't like make someone come and talk to you because I want to have this information from you. You can't, that is not objective. They need to be willing. It needs to be selfish for them to talk with you. But if they're talking with you, it is completely rational to just do what's called active listening or empathic listening, where you really listen to what they're saying and see if you can understand what they mean, what their values are, what they're after. You're just really taking it in and processing it and doing your best to understand. And I mean, to some extent, that's what the active listening is, what you do in an audience at a talk. But you can do this one-on-one, and you can do this like in networking situations where someone is like talking and they want to just talk about themselves for 5 minutes. You can make that be a value-oriented experience if you just think in terms of, what can I learn from this person? And ask some questions. Every single person is very interesting if you get them talking about their first-hand values, and everybody has some. And if you can draw them out on that, you can learn the most amazing things. So, but it's really critical that you need to want to understand them, that you're in a conversation, and then you basically take the responsibility for the communication to happen. You're doing active listening to get the transfer to happen. That's under your unilateral control. Otherwise, you need an agreement about that one person is trying to explain to the other. Okay. The most complex is the value of connection, and this is actually a value that I think people don't necessarily understand. It's when it's explained out in the wild, it tends to be very woo-woo. What I understand is closely related to what we know of in objectivism as visibility, but it's more general than that. What connection is mutual awareness of a shared value. So like if you both go to a movie and you're both emotionally, taken by it, and like say there's a hero, or you both admire Ayn Rand, when you see, wow, this person really gets what a great woman she is, this person really gets it, you feel an emotion. It's an emotion of love or affection. And it's because you see, they get this thing that I get, that I value. They value what I value. This is the definition of an ally. An ally is someone who shares your rational values. That means that they are someone who is at least in that area, pointed in the same direction. And there's, this is what friends are for, right? Friends, it's wonderful to find allies, people who share your values. So it's a really important value. And of course, for those of you who don't know what visibility is, this is something that's not discussed that much, but it's in the back issues of the Objectivist newsletter and the Objectivist. Visibility is the case when someone actually sees you for the values that you take pride in, right? So I've been working hard to be clear. If someone comes up and says, wow, Jean, that was a particularly clear lecture, that will give me the value of visibility. Now, on the other hand, someone in the audience, there's like a reciprocal thing, which is inspiration. If this is a really clear talk and someone thinks, wow, I want to be clear like that. I hope it's a clear talk, because otherwise this example is really falling flat. But you can be inspired by someone else pursuing a value. Those are both cases under the category of connection. I think it's a very important and under-recognized area of social values, at least, actually, worldwide. Now, it's very important that you don't confuse connection, which is a rational value, from a desire for approval or a desire for emotional harmony. Those are entirely secondhand and entirely, will absolutely mess you up if you try to, get some kind of emotional harmony. The only way to do that is to give up your own judgment. And so that is not what I'm talking about when I talk about connection. And I think because of the widespread teaching of altruism, a lot of people confuse connection with a desire for approval or a desire for emotional harmony. Because the truth is that if you get genuine connection, you do feel admiration for the other person. There is approval, and you do feel emotional harmony, but those aren't the end. That isn't the end. The end is actually seeing, wow, this person really judges this rationally for themselves. Now, in order to have a conversation where your goal is connection, you really do need both people on board for that most of the time, because it means talking about your values and introspecting what matters to you. Like if you want to talk about a movie, or you want to talk about like a political situation and how you're impacted by it, that's personal, right? To really make that connection, people need to be personal. They need to be talking about what this means to me. The only exception, a case where you can decide what I want is connection, and they don't have to do anything, is when you're listening to them and you're thinking about trying to understand what are their values in relation to mine. And I'm going to give you a little example of this in a bit. This is a skill. I'm not going to teach you this skill. It can't be taught in a lecture. It can be taught in, workshops and things like that. I can tell you about how you can learn it, but I want to give you kind of the idea of what it is. And there are a couple of things you do. You wind up reframing their negativity in terms of what are they really wishing for. Instead of what don't they like, what are they wishing for? And you're trying to identify their value. What's their intention in the best possible light? And if you can do that, if you can actually take whatever a person says and listen to it with the idea of translating the negativity and looking for the best of their intention, it really changes the conversation, and it permits you to have conversations on really difficult topics. And it can be done unilaterally. So the purpose of this first section here of the meat, the purpose here is to understand intentions in conversations are somewhat complex. Generally, it's communication, cooperation, connection, but because it is basically a cooperative undertaking, you need to have gotten the buy-in, and that, sometimes people get confused about that. And so it's a skill to be able to unilaterally make this work without necessarily their buy-in. But it's a doable skill. So that's the intention point. So then, now let's talk about the execution issue. This is, you actually get into the heat of the conversation. There are two important cases. One is about you, one is about them. The case about you is you feel disruptive emotions. The case about them is you observe something about them in the conversation and you're tempted to criticize or blame them, or you're tempted to psychologize about, meaning try to figure out what in their psychology could be going on to make them do that. And neither of these, all three of these, or two big points with two little points, so 3 points, 2 points, whatever you want to count, however you want to count the points. All of these cases, the thing to do is to try to make the rational values explicit. You are trying to eliminate the mind reading. That is the critical thing you're trying to do in execution. Get rid of all mind reading, theirs and yours. And the technique that I use for doing this is, I call it rationally connected conversations. It's a variation on Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, which is a great example of something that has some rational values in it, but on the surface looks not very rational. And that's why my version has got, it's rational all the way down. And I'm just going to go through an example, actually kind of an extended example that involves all three of these cases, and show you how this can be used to really change the reaction, change the productiveness of the conversation. So let's take the first case. You feel disruptive emotions. Now, some of you have taken class I gave 2013 on how understanding your emotions can help you think and act logically. It's available at ARI. And the critical thing you need, if you have a disruptive emotion, you can't think straight. Emotions create emotional overload. You need crow space to be able to think. So you need to do something if you are having an emotional reaction. And this is an execution issue. If you have an emotional reaction in the middle of a conversation, you need emergency introspection. That is what is going to calm you down. And so, because right now, you need to kind of get yourself grounded so you can think. And the way you do that is by getting clear on what value are you after right now. And that's the purpose of introspection. So let me give you an example. This is a real example. It happened less than a week ago. Okay? I have a dear friend who, by complete coincidence, happened to call me in the middle of when I was dealing with a very stressful situation. I was trying to figure something out, and I was really stressed out. But did I mention she's a dear friend? When I saw her name on the phone, I thought, oh, I should get that. And so I answered the phone. And she had, you know, some little thing to say, and then she said, and I would like to give you some criticism of your talks. And now I had an emotional reaction to that. But this is what I did. I let myself feel the negative feeling, like, no, I can't deal with this right now, which is something like that. You know how it is inside your head. And then I went through this process. It's observation, feeling, need, request. Observation. Now, an observation is absolutely factual. Here was my observation. I answered the phone. Feeling stressed, needing concentration, and it was about that intensity. Now, this helped me get objective immediately. I realized, oh my God, I shouldn't have picked up the phone. What do? Well, what you do in this situation is you meet your own needs. We are selfish. I needed concentration. I took a step to get concentration because that was my need. I wasn't relying on her to meet my needs. I was going to meet my need. I said, oh, gee, you know, I see I shouldn't have picked up the phone. I'm really stressed. Can we talk about this later? That was me acting to, I mean, I don't know if that's exactly what I said, but it was approximately that. You know, it's not her fault, right? I picked up the phone. Did you guys hear that? She legitimately assumed that I could talk. I was the one being subjective. Didn't make sense. And so I needed to get the objectivity there. And I did it with this simple process. Now, and that's the case of you have a disruptive emotion. Now, the second case is when you see some observation and you're tempted to criticize or blame. And the thing to do there is to guess what's the value to them. Now, I'm going to tell you what she said in response. And I warned her I was going to tell this story. Love her more after having analyzed this example. But she said, just 2 words, go slow. I don't know if I've gone slow enough. I'm actually trying to go slow. So if I'm too fast, it's slower than it would be. Okay? But you notice I requested we talk about it later, but she didn't want to talk about it later. She told it now. And I could criticize her for that. But what I did instead is I guessed what was important to her. So I made an observation. She said, go slow. What might she be feeling? There seemed to be some urgency in her manner. What might be the value that is really important, her need to express this? It's the deep rational value of contribution. She wanted to help me. She wanted this talk to be successful. She loves me. I was uncomfortable at the time, but this was entirely good intentions, right? I did think of that quickly because I've learned how to do this. And I remembered that my need was concentration, so I said something, I don't know, innocuous. I think I said thank you. I hope I said thank you. If not, thank you. I said thank you later for sure. And we closed the call. And here's the really important thing. By having done this process, I was not at all flustered by this. I went right back to what I was doing. I was able to concentrate. You know how you can ruminate things when things go wrong? Oh no, I'm stressed out and here now this is happening, I'm distracted. It's really easy to go off in a spiral, but not if you are really clear, wow, I'm wanting concentration, she's wanting to contribute. Okay, well, goodbye, and let me get back to work. And, by doing this, by meeting my own needs in the conversation, it was all fine. Now, there are all kinds of wrong things that you can do in this situation. And the worst thing that you can do is to psychologize about the other person. Like suppose, and I don't believe any of these, I'm just making these up. Suppose, here's some unhelpful interpretations that I would get by jumping to conclusions about why she was telling me to go slow. She wants to control me. That's second-handedness, right? Or she wants to help. She's an altruist. She's focusing on helping. It's amazing how we can jump to philosophical conclusions based on 2 words that someone said. And it's not right. And yet it happens all the time. And if you jump to those words, this is psychologizing basically. Now there are times when you need to look at another person and try to infer, well, what are the premises they have that are causing them to do this? But not in the middle of a one-to-one conversation. The time that you analyze a person's psychology is when you have a lot of data about them and you've seen them act across a long time. Unless it's really egregious. And this is, of course, the opposite of that. So you get into a lot of trouble if you try to jump to conclusions about why they're saying what they're saying, instead of stay benevolent. Oh, I didn't tell you, I didn't read my little line about what benevolence is. You need benevolence if you're having a one-to-one conversation. That doesn't mean that you let them walk over you or whatever. Benevolence means that when they say or do something that you have a negative reaction to, you assume that one of you is confused or overloaded or conflicted, and that what they did is it may be mistaken, but in some way an attempt to achieve some rational value. That's what benevolence is. Now, remember at the very beginning, I said you shouldn't have this conversation if you shouldn't be talking with this person. If you're talking with this person, you have enough evidence that they are a good enough person that you should be benevolent in the conversation. If you don't think that they deserve the benefit of the doubt, that their intentions are rational, or you don't think that, if you don't think that, you shouldn't be having a conversation, period. And if you're not aware that you might be the one who's confused or overloaded, or it could be them, and that this is a real thing and it happens and it makes it difficult to think, you need to hold that context. That's part of the objectivity. You know, the bottom line here is no mind reading. No mind reading. The benevolence, the benefit of using some of the terms that are on the back sheet of your handout, they're called deep rational values, and they give a benevolent interpretation of what the person is after. And if you can keep and make that benevolent interpretation, you don't put your foot in the mouth. You don't mess up a long-time friendship with someone you care about. You don't feel ill will. You know, the general lesson here is that you need to be prepared to handle subjectivity in a one-to-one conversation. Your subjectivity or their subjectivity. Everybody, the subjectivity is a kind of a default. If you don't make an effort to really see what is the objective thing, where is the objective connection between us, you can easily fall into subjectivity just by assuming that you've already got that alignment when you don't. But if you are prepared to reframe, keep yourself grounded, focus on the values, no matter what happens, your conversations will be more productive. You will not take issues personally, and you will help ensure that they don't either. You know, I got an email, to finish this story, I got an email the next day, and she was worried. She was like apologizing. No, I shouldn't have said that. And I wrote back and I said, I actually told her in the words, which I didn't do during the conversation, because remember, I wanted concentration, so I didn't want to like go off and explain to her. But the next day in email, when she was concerned, I said, oh no, it's no problem. I know you're trying to help. You want this to be the best lecture possible. And I think I expressed my appreciation. And I hope that's how she took it. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about it after she hears this lecture. I warned her I was going to talk about it so she wouldn't worry in the middle. What is she going to say about this? Oh no. You can only do this with a dear friend. Okay, bottom line. I've given you the big picture and an example of how unilateral action can make a conversation more objective. It is not easy, but it is a learnable skill. And it's got two parts. Your intention. Make sure your purpose, make sure it's formulated in terms of a deep rational value, that it is a rational purpose, that it is appropriate in this circumstance. And your execution. If you get uptight or they get uptight or whatever happens, guess the deep rational values that are involved. Think of it all in terms of values. You won't make the missteps personally. They will appreciate the additional clarity and understanding. You will build respect into the conversation. You will have much more productivity, much more productive conversations. Objectivity in both intention and execution in a conversation builds relationships, avoids misunderstandings, and makes communication easier and more productive. That's what I want for you. Thank you. So we have some time for questions. You're first, yeah?
I have a question of immense personal importance to me. And that question is, after reading The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, I found out that a lot of things I'm doing in my life are for the sake of approval from other people. And
welcome to the crowd. Okay.
And now I want to change it. And I want to change the way I feel. And what can I do other than just focus on the value I want to get? Because there are things I've done purely out of approval, and they're the easy cases. I just throw them out. But there are things where I can really gain value, but also I've done them for approval. And now every time I'm acting in order to gain them,
it's all confused, right? Do you have one concrete that you don't mind sharing? It's okay if you don't.
Yes.
One. Okay.
For example, asking this question here.
Okay. You want my approval, but you really want to know the answer.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Well, you have my approval if that helps a lot. This is a critical issue. I've been working on this problem, and I'll tell you, the list of deep rational values on the backside, which I decided I really didn't have time to explain, and I would just talk about it in the Q&A if it was appropriate. What I find is the critical thing, and this is the methodology that I teach, which I do teach this in the Thinking Lab. When you have that desire for approval, and you see, yeah, I think there's a rational element. So what would you name the rational element as? What is it that you want? What you're sure it's reasonable to ask this question. So tell me, what do you think makes it completely reasonable?
I want to feel better, and I know you have expertise. So I want you to maybe give me some guidance.
Great. So you really do want some teaching. You really do want, you see me as an expert. You respect it. You want the knowledge, right? These are all rational values. Now, there is one thing that you said, which you probably don't know, was a little bit off, which is I want to feel better. And this is something, people in the Thinking Lab will recognize what I'm about to say here. It never works to set an emotion as a goal. That is one of the big problems with altruism and the whole current culture, is it makes it all about the emotions instead of the values. Now, the truth is, if you do focus on the rational value you're going to get, and get the rational value, you will feel better. But you can't make feeling better the means to the end or the end. So for example, sometimes one of the things that you need to do is you need to look at the irrational part. So now you also think there's an issue of approval here. Now tell me how that comes up here. Is it you're just worried that you're not going to get approval? Or is it that you wanted approval? I'm just asking.
I'm not sure. I just think like I felt this, oh, everybody would look at me and maybe ask a very good question. They would think I'm very smart.
Maybe they'll like me because I'm so smart and I asked a question Jean wanted to answer, right? And that's, you know, you can see right off the top, the reason you're uncomfortable is that's a second-handed reason, right? I mean, it's like obviously a second-handed reason. Okay, the fact that that thought flits through your head, no problem. The fact that you have that emotion, no problem. Kudos to you for acting on your rational conclusion, which it was perfectly reasonable to ask this. You don't get any penalty for feeling a feeling based on some old conclusions. But now you'd like to disintegrate it. Well, here what I would say is, let's reframe that. So let's try to look at some social value you'd get that's not approval. Like you ask a good question. You did ask a good question. How many people thought this was a great question? Okay. And what is the rational thing that happened? Everyone felt connected to him. You actually got the value of connection with everyone in the audience because they have the same problem. And that is a reframing of the situation where you say, oh, it's not really approval I wanted. I wanted a genuine sharing of values, and I actually got that. Wow. Does that like completely change your experience of this? Think about it. Tell you what, think about it. This is not something you learn in a Q&A period, but there is a real process for this. It's rationally connected conversations is the process. It really can be done. And it's the two parts. You need to look at both the rational part and honor that. Look at the irrational part, identify why it's irrational, and figure out what's the rational thing that you were really trying to, and then reframe it. Good?
Thank you very much.
And I have to say one other thing. It's not always pleasant, because sometimes, like, you probably felt a lot of grief when you realized you were doing certain things for approval. It's like, wow, it's like it colors these past decisions you've made, and that you need to work through. That's not pleasant, but that is value-oriented, and you feel better afterwards. So, good question. I mean, they're all good questions. Don't get me wrong. If I don't say yours is a good question, it still is. Okay, next.
What do you recommend for when you have to be in a conversation with someone you can't give the benefit of the doubt or can't feel benevolence towards because you do know information about them that, like...
So, in this case, I would really challenge the have to. So why do you think, give me one reason why you might have to be in that conversation, because I don't believe that. I believe you always have a choice.
If they're your parents or like your boss, a coworker,
okay,
someone
so
you can't just avoid conversation with easily without further consequence.
So let's look at those three cases. So parent, so I think the really important thing here is to remember in these cases, should you be having a relationship with this person? And my bet is with the parents, you should have a relationship. That they are mixed, but there is a basis for mutual valuing. And there what you need to do is you need to delimit the relationship. Now, if you're living at home with them, you know, let's not talk about that case because that's a much more complex case. I'm not going to try to solve that. But if you're an adult on your own, you can limit the amount of conversation you have with them, and you can limit the topics you talk about. You can say, you know, I really don't want to talk about that right now. This is called setting a boundary. A lot of times people think that the way, if you have an uncomfortable relationship with someone, the way that you solve that is by getting them to change. But what you really do is you figure out, well, what do I want to do in that situation? So like name one thing your parents might say that you would hate having to have that conversation. Actually, it doesn't have to be your parents. I don't want to be too personal, but one thing.
I don't know, that I need to do more chores.
You need to do more chores?
Yeah.
Well, so you are at home?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, see, that's a little bit different because you're actually literally dependent on them, and they, you know, so you need to establish some ground rules for that. So let's take one for someone who is emancipated fully. Someone must be able to give me an example. Let's take let me just.
I could do a coworker one if you
want.
Well,
let me just concretize this because I think it's important. Like your parents have a completely different political view and they want to like tell you, you shouldn't be, you know, going after this capitalism stuff. This is all wrong, you know, whatever it is. And you've concluded that they are not. This is not an area you have any mutual values. You do have nothing to learn from them. And you don't want to talk with them about that. You can say, you know, parent, unfortunately, I really don't want to talk with you about this. And if they keep talking, you say, I'm sorry, I'm going to go away. I love you, we'll talk some other time. And then you hang up the phone or you leave or whatever. That's setting a boundary. You decide what you're going to do to meet your needs when you are in this uncomfortable situation. You don't count on them to do it. Now, the boss case, if you think your boss is fundamentally dishonest, you must quit. If you do not think you can have that there's any basis for a cooperation, you should not be working there. You should not be working on a project that you think is immoral or irrational. This is you need to get a job where you think it's reasonable, like maybe you're at McDonald's. Okay, it's completely rational to serve people food. That's okay. It's actually completely rational to have a job. It's completely rational to set schedules for your manager. So there are a whole bunch of things that are rational. So most cases, the boss, it's mixed, and you need to have some alignment, and you figure that out. You're working for this boss because you are sure it's in your self-interest to be at this job at this location. And the work that you do for yourself to figure that out, super helpful, completely changes the experience. And you don't have to talk about politics with your boss. You don't have to, you can say, this is work. I prefer to have us keep this on a professional basis. And you just come up with a one-liner at that and refuse to be drawn in. That's what I recommend. Good?
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Hello. My question is about humor. How would you integrate humor in one-on-one conversations? What's your view on this topic? And do you think a particular sense of humor is needed for objectivity?
I certainly don't think a particular sense of humor is needed for objectivity, quite the reverse. So I don't know that much about humor, but I know Ayn Rand said it's basically when you make a joke, the object of the joke you're saying is metaphysically unimportant. So the one thing I would say in one-to-one conversations, if you're making jokes about something that the other person thinks is important, that's not objective. And if you know it's important to them, you shouldn't be doing that. That's non-objective on your part. You're actually creating ill will between you. But if you have a shared sense of humor, it's wonderful. And if you don't know, if you're letting your sense of humor out, this is a great way to find people with a similar sense of life, because if they think the same things are funny, it's a great source of connection. Good?
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hey, so I really liked your clarity of the talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate that.
So my question is about one of the assumptions that you put on the handout, that you should not be talking with a person if you know something about them which should rule out the conversation. And dishonesty could be an example of that. But how to judge whether someone is dishonest or just utterly confused? Because these two can be extremely similar.
Right. So I would always give the benefit of the doubt in that situation. Unless you have, to decide someone is dishonest, you actually need quite a lot of data. Quite a lot of data. I like to tell this, I'm going to give this example. I know a situation where an individual lied to 3 people in one conversation. It was just, he said something that was absolutely wrong, and there were 3 people in the conversation. And they figured out it was wrong soon thereafter, and one of those people broke almost immediately. The other one broke after a year when the issue had not been clarified. And the third one broke, I believe, after 2 years. And how long it took for them to break was directly proportional to how close they were to the person. So the person who had the least relationship, because it was a proven lie that was not, dealt with, basically gave short shrift. But after the fact, after getting more data, because you can't tell in the moment the person could have been confused. And so you always need more data. There's probably, you can probably find a counterexample for that, but in real life with real people who you actually share some values with, you need a little more context. But the person for who it was after 1 year had a much bigger context, and the one with 2 years had the most context.
Yeah, so I have a personal example that probably would be appropriate to that. So I had a friend, not very close, but
a friend.
Yeah, just a friend.
Pal.
And it may be said, you call that. And one day she started insult me for no reason. And when I asked for a reason, she didn't give me one. She was violating my privacy and so on and so on. And in this context, I wasn't able to converse with her. And
okay, so first of all, let me just say, sounds like this, no, I don't think you were able to converse with her, and you certainly shouldn't have. If she's starting to insult you, you should not have that conversation now. Now, and if you really don't have any value in that, if this was not someone who you ever enjoyed interacting with, then you might never talk to her again. Or you might, not pursue it. But if it's someone who you valued, that you were like really disappointed about that, It is absolutely worth going back and talking with them sometime when they're calm, because, you know, it takes skill if the person is upset. And this, people say when they're upset, they say all kinds of insulting and mean things that they don't really mean. And you need to be able to hear that and not conclude that that's what they really mean. But that is a skill. That is a skill of, in effect, emotional resilience. It's a learnable skill. Most people don't have it. Okay? So I would definitely not jump, if this person had been essentially rational in other regard, I would take that with a grain of salt. I would get out of the conversation because you didn't know how to handle it, and it's not right to have her insulting you, or I think you said it was a her. But if this person had been of value to you, I would definitely come back when you're calm, if you can, and say, and I would do it from a benevolent perspective. You know, I was really hurt to hear you say these things. I thought we had a connection. I thought we had some shared values. I thought we had some shared respect. Can we talk about what happened? Because I really would like to put our relationship back on a better footing. And if you go with that goal, she will be in a much different place to be able to then tell you what's going on. That she couldn't explain herself on the spot, she's probably emotionally overloaded. So I would absolutely explain it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Great. All right, well, thank you all.